Lighting small spaces can be really challenging. Whether it's YouTube or interview or any other scenario, when the space is restricted, it may be really hard to get the results you want. In this video, I'll show you how to get from this to this. We'll go step by step, starting with one light, then we'll add additional lights and see how they shape the space. I'll show you not only how to light it, but also what gear you need to use and how you can do it on a minimal budget. Before we even get to the space itself and the setup, the first thing you have to consider is what result you want to achieve, what kind of look you're going for. In this scenario, I wanted to go with this kind of cinematic lighting, for the lack of better description. So we have light coming from one side, I wanted deep shadows on the other side, and I also wanted something to separate me from the background, some sort of a rim light and something to light up the shelves with the equipment to add a bit of depth to the scene. This may not necessarily be the look you want to go for, maybe you want something that's more high-key or more evenly illuminated, but then you can just, reposition the lights, use the same principles you will see in this video, and go for the look you want. Another thing you should consider is, do you need to keep this light consistent from scene to scene, or for multiple uses? Let's say you have a YouTube channel and you want every single video to be illuminated the same way. Well, you need a setup that you can set up permanently, or you can easily replicate it in future videos to keep it consistent. If, however, you don't need that consistency, then, you can just play with different setups in every single video, and that's absolutely fine. And finally, you need to be realistic about the space you are working in. Yes, you can create a lot, even if the space is restricted, but you cannot create everything. There is no depth for certain types of shots or using certain types of lenses. There's not necessarily enough space to use haze machine or stuff like that. So just be aware that certain things simply won't be possible. Okay, so this is the space I'm working with. It's roughly 2 by 2 meters, or about 7 by 8 feet if you prefer. If I stretch out my arms, I can pretty much touch the walls, so we really don't have much space here. Also, to make things more interesting, most of this wall and whole this wall are floor-to-ceiling windows. So we have all of that light to control during the day. And the other two walls, they have doors in them. This door doesn't even work, so basically it's just an opening to the kitchen. And this door is made of glass. So not an ideal scenario in terms of space to work with. The only positive thing is that those two doorways offer a little bit more space to place the lights. And as you can see on this side, actually, that's where I put my key light. So that's the Amaran 60X with a softbox. And behind it, there is a second light, Amaran 150C with a spotlight. So I kind of tucked them out of the way there. The other lighting in the room is this little Amaran MC12 or whatever it's called light here, which will be acting as a rim light. And there is also LED light strip just going around the shelves to add some light in the background. So this is how it all looks like. The camera I'll be using for the recording later is here, and I'll be sitting in the chair here, kind of like this. So here is our first setup. First of all, the room needs to be blacked out if at all possible. I cannot fully black out the room because two windows are just glass and they don't have blackout blinds, so I'm shooting after dark. Daylight is great, but you cannot control it, and sometimes it may work, sometimes it doesn't. So personally, I prefer to shoot in conditions where I can fully control the light, so either after dark or with blackout blinds or whatever other scenario. So if I switch off the light, the room is pitch black. And the only light I'm using now is the Amaran 60X with 3-foot softbox and a grid. So just key light, illumination coming from one side, camera is straight in front of me, the light is roughly 45 degrees to my right, and this is my only illumination. And to be honest, I quite like this light. It's not always the most flattering one, so it may not necessarily work for you depending on the look you want to go for, but personally I like it. The only issue is that the scene is quite flat. There isn't really that much color in it, there isn't that much depth. I don't particularly like how this side of the room looks like. It could work, but for me this really doesn't. So we'll add something more to it. So here is setup number 2. Still the same key light, And now I just added some cheap LED strip lights from Amazon, about 20 bucks or so, just to add some depth to the shot and introduce some color. And you can play with colors of both lights, so they can act quite nicely as a contrast, or they can be complementary, whatever works for you. I used this setup in the past quite a lot for my previous YouTube channel. And to be honest, if you're just talking about something that's not necessarily video or lighting or photography related, you don't really need something much more fancy than that, right? You can, of course, keep adding more and more lights to make the look more interesting, but I think for many situations this will be perfectly fine, or some variation of this setup. Here is look number 3. Previous two lights remain the same. All I added is just rim light or hair light, which is this warm light coming from above, from behind me, just to add a bit of separation. So it's hitting the back of my head, my shoulder. It's also lighting up some of the stuff in the background, like the plant over there, but it's mainly supposed to separate me from the background. What I could also do is switch off the LED lights. If I can actually switch them off, there you go. And now I have just my key light and rim light, and that's also a really nice look. If you don't want all that color, if you find it too messy or it just doesn't work for your scene, then this is perfectly good setup, right? Let's say it's an interview or something like that, and you just want to keep your lighting nice and clean. You will just use those two lights. That's all you need. The light I'm using as a rim light is one of those Aputure MC12 lights. There are a few different versions of either Aputure lights or other brands. They are quite powerful considering their size, battery powered, so you don't have to worry about cables or anything. They have built-in magnets, so you can easily attach them to any metal surface. And yeah, they're really cool to either use as a rim light or just kind of place them in a scene somewhere to light up various parts of the scene. Really cool bit of kit. You could also use another Amaran 60X or some other light, but whatever you're using, you probably want the light to be quite concentrated. I don't have a grid for those, as I mentioned earlier, so all I did is I used some gaffer tape to kind of narrow the beam of light a little bit, but ideally you would put a grid on it or a snoot or something like that, so the light is quite concentrated and just hitting this area right here. And here is setup number 4. So we have now 4 lights. 3 of them are exactly the same as they were before. Amaran 60X with the softbox, MC12 acting as a rim light, LED light strip, and I now added Amaran 150C with a spotlight attachment, which is throwing this light in the background. The reason why I'm using this light is to basically make the light that's lighting up my face more believable. Because if I switch it off, like it was the case in the setup number 1, the light itself may look nice, but there is no clear light source for that main source of light, right? There is no window, there is no lamp you can see in the shot. It looks a little bit fake, which is fine. It works perfectly fine as a still nice looking lighting, but if you want to make it look more believable, you want to add something that suggests where that light is coming from. And here I'm using that spotlight attachment to throw some light in the background. It looks a bit like a beam of light coming from the window with some leaves or something, branches. And basically it just indicates that I am being illuminated by that window, which actually doesn't exist. That light is placed in the kitchen. So you can play with a few different setups here. That could be much more harsh. You could spread that light. You can do pretty much whatever you want. But it just adds that additional element to make it look a bit more believable. One last thing I could try is changing the color of that LED light strip, because at the moment it's adding some color that's nowhere else in this scene, which I quite like, just to add some contrast. But I could try to match it a bit better with the light I'm using as a rim light or hair light. So for example, something like this. And that also is quite a nice look, because all the lights on this side now are in those warm tones. If you use better quality LED light strip, you could match color temperature of that and any other light. I have only a few options here. This is just a temporary setup, so it works, but ideally you could match all those color temperatures or HSL values or whatever they are, and have one color on this side and then another color on this side. So here are the lights I'm using for this setup. First one is Amaran 60XS. It's the one I'm using as my key light. It's a 60-watt light. There are plenty of different ones from various manufacturers, Godox, Nanlite, many others. You can get lights like this even cheaper than that, and those are Canadian dollars, not US dollars. Bear in mind that a light like this will not be powerful enough to overpower the sun even on a heavily overcast day. So even if you are inside and there are windows and there isn't really that much light coming through the window, this is still not be enough to overpower it. But if you are working in a really dark room, it's perfectly fine, or relatively dark room. At the moment, this light is set to like 25%, and it's more than enough. The other light I'm using is Amaran 150C, and this is a massive, massive overkill for this scenario. It's just what I happen to have on hand, so I wanted to show you that specific light, but it's set actually to just 2% of its power. Especially with the spotlight, it's producing even more light. Well, it's not producing more light, but the light is even more concentrated, so the output is higher. And you definitely don't need it for a scenario like this. Another 60X or something even less powerful will be perfectly fine, but this is the one I have here. The spotlight attachment I'm using is this one. It's Amaran Spotlight SE. This one can be used with lights only up to 300 watts. If you're using more powerful lights, you need different attachment. It's much bigger, more expensive, basically designed to work with more powerful lights, which generate more heat. So for lights up to 300 watts, this one is perfect. It comes with different inserts. So I used one which is, well, it pretends to give this sort of like branches and leaves look, but you can use ones which look like a window or something like that. There are many, many different ones. And you could create your own ones, I suppose, and insert them as long as they won't set themselves on fire. But yeah, this is really good to create this really interesting light in the background to just add something more to the scene, but it's by no means necessary. It's quite an expensive bit of kit, especially if you are on a budget. So yeah, don't think that you must have it, but if you can, it can add a lot. And if you're shooting a lot of interviews or you shoot in different locations and you want to add that element in the background, just something a bit more interesting, then it's certainly worth considering. And then finally, the little light I mentioned before is one of those. It's Amaran MC. I think they changed the name a couple of times. There's also, I'm pretty sure, MC Pro version, and I think there's like Ace 25. There are a few different ones, but basically you're looking for something like this. And again, there are other manufacturers who make them. There are plenty of different options. They are quite inexpensive, about, well, just a bit over $100. Some of the more fancy versions can be a couple hundred. But they are super, super useful, not only as a rim light, but also to add a bit of light in, like I said before, in different spots around the scene. In theory, you could use even in a small space a light like this as your key light, but it's really small. You cannot really get a softbox for it, so it won't be the most flattering type of light, but in terms of the power output, it's perfectly suitable. One last thing is the softbox, and there are many, many different options. I would say that the one I'm using, the 3 feet one, is too big for a space like this, but I didn't have a grid for a smaller one. I have also 2-foot softbox, so 60 centimeters, which would be much more suitable. And also it would control the light in this space a bit better. So if anything, in small spaces, I would recommend using smaller softboxes. But like I said, without a grid, this would be just like a light grenade. It would light up the whole space, so I had to put the grid on. And for the smaller one, I didn't have one, so I had to use this one. Plenty different options. If you need to often collapse it and set it up again, consider one which is really easy to fall down, really quick to fall down. Otherwise, if it's just going to be permanently in one spot, you can get something that's a bit cheaper, but a bit more hassle to put it down. So that's pretty much all the equipment. I showed you earlier my negative fill, which is basically just a blanket on a lighting stand. Not the most professional thing, but it works. Then of course you will need some lighting stands and other bits like that, but the main elements, the lights and the light control, that's essentially all I'm using here. I think that's it in this video. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments section. If you would like to see more videos like this or different lighting setups, please do let me know also in the comments, and I will try to make those videos for you. And if you enjoyed this content, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.